talking about it.
Okay, I think we're gonna get going. We've almost got everybody in. They'll be in the next few seconds, I think. So welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. And neither my name's Gavin. If any of you don't know me, I'm director, and I'm here with Ruth Claxton as well, who's associate director here at Eastside Projects. And neither of our backgrounds are anywhere near as good as our special guest today, who we're visiting, Alice Channer, in her studio in London. Can't remember exactly where. It's somewhere near the Blackwall Tunnel. You'll have to tell us a little bit where it is. I remember going there in the flesh. But we're going to have the pleasure of exploring some materials and finding out more things about Alice, which me and Ruth are always interested to do. Alice has been an artist that we've worked with now for quite a number of years and keep being really fascinated by her processes, making things at lots of different scales, and has been really interesting that I think we'll probably talk a bit about embedding artistic processes into industrial and factory processes here in Birmingham and in Digbeth in particular, which we've had a chance to explore over the past few years. So we're going to chat for, I don't know, 30, 40 minutes or so, something like that. But also please do put forward any questions in the chat. We'll try and look in on the chat throughout, but also you can ask questions at the end. And it's the first time that we've done one with two of us joining in the conversation with the artist as well. So welcome to Alice. I think you need to say something, Alice, so we can see your background probably. So you can take centre stage.
Hello, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. Welcome. This is my pool.
Yeah.
The pool.
This is. I can actually imagine you doing this for if we were coming to visit in the real space. So that's what I really like about it. That it feels very you.
Okay. Yeah.
I think there is that. I mean, there's that notion of what you do for a studio visit. You know, how do you welcome people into your practice, and how do you? I mean, whether someone knows you already or it's the first time they've come across your work in a way, it is something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, I think like a lot of artists, I've found studio visits sometimes quite strange, and I think especially for me they're very odd, because what is my studio? You know, I do have a studio-based practice, or a better way to say that would be that part of my work is studio-based, and there's long-term sort of formal material experimentation that happens here. All of the things in the pool with me now are all things that are in the studio and that have been here for many years. I kind of collect things here, like lots of artists. But there's another kind of big part of my work that happens outside of the studio. So anybody coming here and hoping to find this sort of, you know, site of, you know, sort of original production isn't going to find it here. And I still think that that's something that's quite sort of fetishized in art and with artists. And I've had some awkward studio visits as a result. You know, you're not going to come here and see something finished in the middle of the room. You know, it's quite rare for that to happen. There'll be sort of parts of things that I don't know what they are. There's a lot of admin that happens here, packing. I do come here every day. But yeah, I think especially also after the so-called lockdown, I was very aware, because I couldn't access the studio for 3 months. Like a lot of artists, I still had to pay for it. So I was aware, you know, what was it? What is this sort of expensive place that I can't get to? And how do I work if I can't go there? But actually what I missed the most was all of the places and the people, the materials and the processes that I make my work sort of with and as part of out there in the world, not in the studio. And I really need all of that friction in order to make work. You know, It doesn't come from here solely. Yeah.
How do you normally lay out or have these materials then? Are they just very matter-of-factly stacked around the room, or?
They're usually everything that's sort of surrounding me is actually all of this I got out of boxes. So I've recently had a big clear up. I kind of came back into the studio a few weeks ago and I've just kind of cleared the decks. So yeah, all of these things were packed up.
Yeah, because I remember when we visited, there were some like incomplete artworks laid out or sections twisted around each other. But obviously, I think I remember you saying that this isn't the artwork yet. This is just, so you do stage some elements.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so for example, there were these behind me. This tube, it's a poly pipe. I really love that material. I love anything that's folded or pleated, and these sort of very sexy pipes that I see all the time in construction sites. There's 2 works that I've made, including those, but anything with a sort of pleated or folded surface I really like. I really don't like smooth continent surfaces, especially in sculpture. And it's been really exciting, obviously, the last month, watching a lot of statues with smooth surfaces kind of come to the ground. But so this pipe, so that, for example, I use that to show me what something that's 3.5 meters tall might look like. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of, I don't know, a working out of a form and what certain sizes might look and feel like here.
And what's that pipe normally used for?
Underground drainage.
Okay, so it's not. It doesn't have another pipe or wiring or anything else inside it. It just has water or.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when I saw it, when I'd seen it in your sculptures, I'd imagined what was inside it as if there were other sort of veins and conduits and other. It's interesting to think of that as the structure itself.
Yeah, well, it is made to contain something, so I think it's completely expected to sort of think of it as a body, as something that might contain moving parts.
Yeah, and how did you? I'm thinking about the photographs that we shared some photographs on Instagram, the ones where you're inserting your body, sort of looking into, and part of it is those structures. Is that, I'm just interested in that, as the relationship of that to the studio, whether you think of that again as a sort of working through process or.
So you're talking about there's artist portraits.
Yeah, the Thierry.
Thierry. In I think 2016, Kettle's Yard were opening, and I had work in that opening show, and they made a catalogue and they asked for an artist portrait, and I wanted to make a new one because what is the artist portrait that I'm happy with? How can I show? It's the same question as what is a studio visit that I'm happy with? How can I show in the best possible way through those mediums sort of what my relationship to my work is? And I knew that I would be comfortable if I could show myself surrounded by and as part of forms and materials. So that's what I was trying to do in those portraits.
Yeah, I just thought that there's that relationship to how you're sitting within this space now feels quite significant.
Yeah, this feels quite honest to me about saying these are some of the forms and materials that I work with. Some of them I've been working with for different amounts of time. They're kind of part of me and I'm part of them, and that's what you're looking at. So I think they can tell you in a way a lot more than I can. I feel much more comfortable with them.
Can I ask a question? Like, what's the funny sort of looks a bit like a rock? It's by your right hand knee.
What's
that?
So this is a lump of concrete, and I collected this, I think about 2015. It was a few studios ago, and it prompted a whole series of studio moves because the streets were being dug up and lots of blocks of luxury flats were being built. and all of this material was being produced when the flats were being dug up. So I started collecting it and bringing it back to the studio. And I was collecting lumps that were sort of big enough just to pick up and put in my rucksack. And this particular rock became a whole series of other forms. So I scanned it, I stretched it to about 3 meters long, 2.5 meters long. And then those stretch forms were carved from CNC and then scanned in different materials to make 2 works. One's called Rockfall, one's called Burial. So this became something that I could stretch.
One of the things that I've got written down on my things to ask you is stretching, and is kind of what stretching kind of seems to come into the work in all sorts of stretching, but then also folding and hiding. And but what is it about? What is it about stretching that you kind of keep being drawn to?
It's something that I learned from another artist, one of my favourite artists, Joel Toolings, and she uses stretching in her work to do all sorts of things. But immediately I could tell that size doesn't mean anything to me, but scale does, because scale is relative and it's got kind of movement built into it. And also, as soon as I stretch something, I make processes visible. It sort of stresses the object and you start to see things in its surface that you couldn't see before. And maybe also, if I show something I can only ever show something that's been stretched if I'm making static sculpture, but it still can look as if it has a sense of movement in it. So it's almost like I'm showing something in a transitional state. So it gets around that whole problem of things being sort of final or fixed.
Yeah, the first things that I can think of were the very large, tall curtain silk works that were.
Oh yeah, we showed it.
That was like stretched backs of statues in the British Museum, wasn't it?
Yeah, there were these 3 sculptures that everybody walks past really quickly in the British Museum on the way to see the Parthenon marbles, and they're 3 sea nymphs that were supposed to escort the souls of the dead across the River Styx. And there's very little left of their bodies. They're really broken. All that's left really is the drapery. And then one of them standing on a dolphin, that's kind of part of the dolphin, but it's quite unrecognisable. But I was just really fascinated that all was left was this drapery that's still very broken, but within it there's this incredible sense of movement. So I wanted to use that in those sculptures, which were for the South London Gallery in 2012, to hold up the ceiling.
Very tall ceiling.
Yeah. But also I think to stretch something sort of massively beyond human scale, and it's that whole question of what encounters with art can do, and hoping that an encounter with an artwork might be something that could show me an alternative state than the one that I might take for granted, and sort of help to sort of push me into new kinds of embodiment, different ways of being. That's my ambition, I think, for making and showing artworks, especially sculptures. And yeah, to go back to your question, Ruth, I think that's what stretching does as well. Kind of encourages me, hopefully, to sort of stretch with the object.
I suppose it was also, I was thinking, it's kind of a very contemporary thing to be able to do.
Yeah, it's true.
These kind of digital processes, whether that's stretching images or, with the 3D scanning things and then stretching the digital models, you kind of couldn't have done that 10 years ago, probably 15, 20 years ago.
Even if the technology was there, I wouldn't have been able to access it, I think. But I think it's important to say I'm using it in a really basic way. I mean, literally just sort of in one dimension, that's it. And then with all the CNC, in some ways, using it in quite a rough way, because you can see the marks on the surface. Although it's not exactly that, because it's still, it's not just kind of like, oh, just do it. All the marks have to be horizontal, for example. Yes. That has to be programmed.
So there's something about that I'm just thinking of. I've sort of hadn't thought about this before, but that when you're the objects or the materials that you've talked about so far, it's like you've seen them. You sort of see them in the street, or you see them in a museum, perhaps. But things have happened to them already that have made them be more noticeable or more unusual. It's not the regular way that you would experience those things, and then you do a second action on top of that makes it like extra unusual, but it actually reveals. I suppose in some way it just shows the making of it. It's like the object revealing its own making, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm sort of really unhappy with ideas about transformation or kind of bringing something to an object or a material that it didn't have already. I always feel that I'm trying to work with it to see what it has, and to kind of make that more visible. So, for example, I don't know if you can see, but here on the floor, kind of twists of pleated fabric, and I made a work last summer for a solo show with Turf Projects in Croydon. I made a massive pool, a birthing pool, and that pool, I think it was 4 meters by 2 meters, the central part, which was like a kind of lily pad, and it was floating in a beach or a sea of 1 ton of this material. But this central sort of lily pad part was made of these kind of twists of pleated fabric, surrounded by just a sort of stainless steel edge that kind of gave them some kind of solidity. But I think that it reminded me that I know what this material is. In that state, it sort of looks solid, but it actually each of these is probably got about 2 meters of pleated fabric in it. The form, what I'm trying to say is that the form that it makes these sort of twists on the ground, it does that really easily. Just, it's very easy to just sort of curl the ends in. It seems quite happily sort of pushed into that shape. I'm not trying to sculpt it, I suppose, or to make it, to ask it to assume a form that represents something else. So in that respect, I'm sort of stopping early. There's an element of sort of unfinishedness, I think, in the work. It doesn't go all the way to. Does that make sense? Yeah. I hope so.
But when did you notice that about the pleating process and that material? How did you become aware of it?
Probably, I've been working with it for a few years, definitely. I've been using it really flat. Processes like that, I mean, the pleating I've been working with for about 15 years now, and at various points during that I've had kind of breakthroughs. And there's something about being able to work with the same process that in some ways has quite strict limitations, and over time you realise it kind of expands rather than getting narrower. You realise more and more and more. It's sort of the opposite of what you'd expect. It doesn't exhaust itself. It expands, and just by coming back to it. And I think being an artist sort of so far has been a bit like that as well. It's so rewarding. You kind of, because I've been doing it for a while now. There's feelings I've had that I'm like, oh wow, okay, yeah, can go back to that, or like the pleating. So the work that I made for Turf Projects, it was the first time I've worked out that these sort of single twists of fabric could be combined to make something really massive. But it was massive in one dimension, I often make work that's monumental, but monumental in one dimension only. So it might be, just a few inches deep, but it might be 4 meters long. There's another pool that I was supposed to show in April as part of high desert test sites in the desert in California. It's a project organised by Andrea Zittel, and this year, for the first time, she'd asked an international curator, Ivana Blazwick, to curate it. And I was making another pool sculpture, which is 20 meters by 10 meters, filled with a very particular material that's kind of from a particular part of the desert, and you can get into it. It's a work that you can climb into. But it's only, I think it's 15 centimetres high, but 8 metres long. So it's massive, monumental in one dimension, but not in the other. And
what was the material you were making that from?
It's made, I wanted to work with I don't want to say until I'm trying to work sort of with the desert and with this particular area of it. It's quite a romanticized landscape, and it's, especially as an outsider coming there for the first time, it's really extremely beautiful. And you have to remind yourself that it is a landscape of sort of extraction and war and human intervention, and all of these things are there, but you sort of, there's so many things that, including yourself, that discourage you from seeing them. So I'm working with this area where a material is extracted, trying to sort of make that more visible. I think that will be next April.
And it will be uncovered outdoors?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing. And
it'll look tiny because it's so, I've never been in a place that was so horizontal, so open and so horizontal. It's really
kind of intimidating, aren't they? I've been to New Mexico and I remember just being like overwhelmed by the scale of it.
Yeah.
Because it's like being in the middle of the sea, like there is no edge. You know, and that doesn't happen very often.
Yeah, especially if you're surrounded by sort of human-made landscapes.
Yeah.
It's really liberating to be reminded of how tiny.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew I couldn't compete with it, whatever I put there.
Yeah.
I just think about that sort of relationship of the singular activity, like you talking about extraction process in the landscape is often, if you keep extracting, you keep doing the same process, it doesn't end up being more interesting in a landscape. It just like depletes and takes away and reduces. But the idea of, as you were talking about being an artist and applying the same process, but that it keeps expanding the opportunities, I was thinking about that's what it looks like in some of the factories that we've been into here as well. Because at first I always think, how do you survive and you only make this sort of thing? You only do one process, and somehow you have a factory and you employ 20 people and you provide things for people all around the world. But then the closer you look, you realize there's all these variations on the one process that they tend to do. But it's quite opposite to the, it's what the landscape would do, but when we extract and just attack, it sort of does the opposite somehow. Yeah.
I think it kind of, one of the interesting things when we were first kind of trying to find people, their plastic dip coaters and people like that, or even when we got in touch with the Salt and Saddler who started making jigs. I think you're still working with, aren't you, to make jigs? Is that I remember phoning up Salt and Saddler and the woman on the phone just kind of going, it will be amazing because no one's ever interested in jigs. And the idea that this process becomes so almost like invisible to people who are using it every day, and like the exciting parts of it and the nuances of it and the possibilities are kind of disappeared by the process of production for, I don't know, a car part or whatever it is that they're doing. It's quite, that kind of richness is often not recognised or just sort of disappears.
Yeah, those are, for everybody that's listening and watching, those are jigs behind Ruth. So I didn't know what a jig was, but a jig is in this context, it's something that holds these other parts so that they can go into machines. And they fascinated me because of the way they look like extremely debased.
There we go.
Some of them anyway seem to have a relationship to sort of extremely debased trees or not trees, like vines or plants, in the way that you'd have a single stem and then all of these kind of parts coming off the stem that would hold these multiple parts, usually plastic, but also metal, when they went into machines, partly for economy, so you can do a million at once, but also because a soft body or a living body or an organic body or a natural body couldn't go into these machines or environments. So these jig forms also really fascinated me because they're kind of extensions of bodies. And I knew that I wanted to make work with them. And it was really interesting listening to you just then, Ruth, talk about these processes as things that we don't see. I think really broadly thinking about this work that's on the screen in front of us, and then other works that I've made using these jig forms in art, just thinking about art being something that's used to make visible forms that influence us and that kind of build us in many ways, but that we don't usually see. And I mean that in the broadest possible sense, but also in the most specific sense. So literally in this sculpture here that's in front of us, this sculpture is really exciting to be in the room with, but it photographs really badly. And this is a case where a lot of my work, I find it really frustrating. When you're in the room, the redness of the tips on those fingers is just electric. You can feel it with your eyes. You want to get close to it, you want to walk around it. But this is an instance, I think, in which photography is great because it does something that the human eye can't. So yeah, you can kind of see that there. But yeah, I was just trying to talk about what the jigs were and trying to use their forms, trying to use found forms within sculpture to constitute sculpture, and to go back to what I was saying before about what the studio is, and the studio not being this sort of essential or kind of foundational origin for work, just as I don't think the artist is either. And those, the forms that constitute the work kind of coming from somewhere else. And of course, there were all sorts of tweaks and decisions that happen to them that are made by the artist, but they're also made by other forms, other materials, other people, other processes.
So it's important to say perhaps that these jigs went through the whole process. So they're not just decorative and then the fingers are kind of stuck on them for display. They are how they're made as well. So there's a kind of circular, it's like a whole circular route.
Here we go.
To everything kind of in that piece of work in a way that it maybe doesn't look like there is. I mean, I suppose for me, one of the really interesting things when I first saw the jigs, and I think maybe we first had the conversation, was at the plastic dip coating place, and they were just everywhere. And it was just like you were walking through some kind of graveyard of sculpture, and they're all bespoke. I mean, that's the amazing thing about them, that they're totally particular to the part that you're making. And so the kind of craft in them, which again is something that no one would ever think about, but the craft in them is kind of insane, and the different ways they can connect things.
There's three in the work that we were just looking at, that this image, this is so erotic, this image. Amazing. It's just incredible. So in those jigs, there's titanium, there's electro-polished stainless steel, and then there's stainless steel wire. So you've got three different metals, not to mention in the cast aluminium and the plastic. But this form that I'm holding up now in front of the screen is a jig. Well, do that.
Wow.
And this form really fascinates me because of the way that it might look like a very, very debased, industrialized, extremely sort of almost like awfully kind of simplified kind of plant form. It's like a sort of stem with different kind of parts growing off it. And I think that this is brass. And then it's dipped in thermoplastic, this liquid PVC, same as the fingers, so that every time that it goes into an electroplating tank into chromium, sulfuric acid and chromium hydroxide, those things can't eat the stainless steel or the brass. And each one of these is a sprung kind of, I guess they're like something that could pinch or that could hold. So, you know, this is an arm with 28 fingers on it, 28 fingers and thumbs on it, maybe. That would be a way of looking at it. But so, for example, these, which are like fat little worms, could go on here like this. So you put that on there. And then you've got the two contact points, two metal contact points contacting the metal. And then they can go into the tanks where they're electroplated. I don't know, it's not my job to be an expert in the process, but it is my job to talk about how it feels, what it feels like.
Yeah. It looks very organic from afar.
Okay, great, because yeah, I see that as well. Yeah. But really, do you think that? Because it's so industrial.
No, it also looks like it's got a bit of randomness to how the shape is, but I think
there's this green plastic. Yeah. They're quite bent, and they're also dripping because they're.
It might just be the resolution of the screen, but it looks like the little pincers don't look smooth. They look a bit rough.
Or do they accumulate stuff as that gets used more and more?
Yeah, it's got these really nice drips on it.
Oh.
But so this is a form that could have. There's probably things in everybody's house, maybe if you have a car, in all sorts of interior and exterior environments that shape our bodies and our minds. These forms would have been used to chrome plate or otherwise kind of plate bits of those environments. So this is something that we don't see, but that kind of makes built environments around us.
I was quite interested in how you come across, how you decide you want to find out about metallizing, or how you decide on, like, what do you just see it in the world and then wonder what it is?
Yeah.
And then
I feel quite. When I went to art school, I think I wanted to feel quite. I felt quite alienated from and estranged from definitely a lot of the built surfaces around me, and I found it quite liberating to find out how they've been constructed and how they've been made. And now, especially when I found ways, I think these are spider crab shells, to try to insert parts of living, sort of self-generating organic bodies into those machines. In this case, sort of hundreds of these fragile and extremely beautiful kind of crab shells. I don't know if can you see the little hairs, its eyes?
Yeah.
They're amazing. That feels like some essential work. It feels like, can I put some sand in the Vaseline? Can I put sort of something in this machine that might slow it down a little bit, or speed it up a little bit, or something that's not supposed to go in there? Can I put that in there? That's
one of the really interesting part. Like, I also remember going into the metallizing place the first time, and the guy being totally convinced that you couldn't possibly put a crab shell in there.
Yeah. Unconvinced.
Well, totally. At first he was like, "Oh, no, that won't work." But it is kind of I suppose one of the other things someone was talking about, the fact that we were doing this the other day, and was kind of asking how you develop the relationships that convince people to put a crab shell in their metallizing machine, and kind of how you work with people, I suppose, in those sort of contexts.
I think I just want to make it happen.
Yeah.
And quite persistent.
Mm-hmm.
Always turn up with stuff. Keep asking.
Yeah.
Usually it's not supposedly not possible.
Mm-hmm.
But this is with all art making, I think. You know, the conditions do not exist for this object. It hasn't been made before. No one's seen it before.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be troublesome in some way for any artwork, I think, to make it happen, to put it in the world. And I just kind of want to see it happen.
So I mean, I think it's that kind of.
I'm not working with crab shells again, though.
No, it's too much.
I just wanted to ask, did you ever get the conversations with, say, the jig making company?
Yeah.
What do they say about this fact that they make something that nobody sees or knows about? Are they do they reflect on that? Were they able to through what you were doing with them? Or?
I'm not sure, because I definitely think that it's valid to say that an audience for this work are people that I'm working with when I make it, who might have an idea of what an artist is, but they hadn't had that before. And I remember in the plastic dipping factory, who never charged me any money, because I think it was more hassle to set me up as a supplier on their system than it was to charge me. You know, I visited a few times, and then in the end we were there a good half day. We had 3 people working with us, but I think it was so unusual that somebody turned up and wanted to do something different, still get a really good result, and really appreciated what they did and thought it was extremely beautiful. It's kind of finding the right people. There's a lot of trial and error, so all the time, and it's been really interesting having a studio clear out the last few weeks and realising, oh, so many false starts, because I find the evidence of them, like, you spent weeks doing that, or you spent months trying to make that happen, what? It just comes down to people in the end, like everything, I think.
Yeah.
And I'm really missed. It was funny how much during the so-called lockdown, I missed the people that I work with, because, you know, the pleating company I work with, I usually see them every month, and it's been for 15 years. So we have a chat, and they're all on furlough, so I missed them.
Mm.
I've got a few questions. Oh, yeah. You doing that as well?
But I wanted to sort of pick up on the fact that you're next to your knee is this giant feather as well, just because I sort of know where it's come from, but I'm still fascinated about where that's going to go. So maybe, but there are more questions about the other materials, but I think you've got to tell us about the feather.
Well, I'm not completely sure where it's going to go, and maybe this is a really good example of what a studio is and what a studio is for, because you can collect things and you can put them here, and they might turn into something else, they might just stay here. But I visited the Jaguar Land Rover factory in Birmingham, and one of the things that I found out was that there's a material, a body part, I think that's why it really fascinated me, that's used in car production, and after the car body is finished but unpainted, the final stage that happens to it before the first primer coat goes on is that the car body is dusted with ostrich feathers. And there are videos on YouTube. It's not just, this doesn't just happen in this Jaguar Land Rover factory. There's four factories, and it's known as a material that for some reason can take off tiny, tiny particles before the primer coat goes on. And only the feathers of female ostriches can be used, because the male ostriches are quite aggressive and they fight, and their feathers get damaged, so they're not soft enough. I don't know what they're going to be used for, but I love the idea of that part of the factory, and the videos I found on YouTube, they're like giant car washers, you know, those huge rotating pipe cleaners, but they're just full of ostrich feathers. And imagine kind of walking through that. Can't they clean my body and take off all the fine particles where I have my primer coat? But also just this idea again, you know, that's the same idea as, you know, hundreds of crab shell bodies going into the metallizing machine. You know, these organic body parts that were sort of generated by living things, being used in these really sort of sterile environments that I should say that, you know, I'm quite terrified by, you know, feel disturbed by these places and by all of these materials, as much as I am sort of seduced by them. My relationship with them is quite complicated. But yeah,
someone wants to know about
it feels really nice.
Who wants to know about the pleated print behind you, the large landscape element, the rocks?
So it's I wanted to make this like a pool, and I thought, okay, if this is a pool, then it can be like the beach maybe. And the image on it I took as part of the Claxton formation, which is a geological formation in North Devon on the UK coastline. It's falling apart, it's crumbling. If you stand underneath parts of it, you can feel the rocks, little bits kind of coming off it. And it began as a project to try to stretch rocks. And it's a section of the Claxton formation that's been photographed, compressed as an image, massively stretched, and then printed onto silk, and then compressed again. So I don't know how well you can see it in the image, but it's covered in tiny pleats. So if you go really close, the image sort of stutters and blurs, and it has this like kind of awkward sort of juddery movement in it. But that's the work. It's part of a series called Soft Sediment Deformation. I'm trying to sort of mimic geological processes of expansion, stretching and compression, but using this industrial process of pleating that's usually used to clothe bodies on a human scale. So I'm again trying to work across massive, very, very different, opposite kinds of scale.
It also looks a bit like snakeskin to me, which I know is something that recurs in your work, an interest in snakeskin and the patterning and the...
Yeah,
it definitely looks like that. There's a question about site specificity in your work, which I think was, that sounded like a very site-specific work, what you were talking about before in the Joshua Tree area in the desert. But how do you think about that, the relationship to the site?
Always, and in different ways. For that work especially, one really interesting thing about that work and that project has been trying to push myself to do that. I visited once, but I didn't want to visit again, and trying to research and get a feeling for places without visiting. That work is going to be shown again at another location in America, and it can be shown again. It just won't have exactly the same relationship. It won't be as specific. So I would call all of my work responsive, but not a response. So it has the capacity to kind of breathe a little bit, you know.
Is that how you feel about that? The fact that you do a lot of shows in gallery spaces as well, that it has to have that same attitude towards a gallery space as it does to a desert.
Yeah, it's probably more exciting in the desert, to be honest. And more, especially now, I'm sort of thinking about showing those kind of locations. You know, those are where usually you make the big leaps. And I think maybe where you can have the most, I don't know, but then galleries can be really good for very sort of intimate engagement. And also there's something to be said for these sort of more white cubey types of places, and being able to see work there in ways that I can never see in the studio, however tidy I make it.
There's a question from Susie about cigarette packets in the box behind you, which I hadn't noticed. I couldn't tell what they were, and that you've been sharing them on Instagram as well.
Yeah, so they were there. I've got a whole box of been collecting these around the studio for a few years. I mean, everybody must be seeing these at the moment, these little kind of, can you see that?
Yeah.
Little body parts kind of littering the streets under our feet. And so I feel like some of them, there are lots of men on ventilators that I started seeing kind of more recently. I think these are really fascinating. Suddenly under my feet there were all these human body parts everywhere, and I did make some work from paper during the lockdown using these, and yeah, I just wanted to have them here. I know they're really grim and people probably don't want to look at them, but I think they're really fascinating. And
well, it's more that sense of how, like, I've only encountered them when I've just been near somebody who still smokes, and they've put the packet down, and I'm sort of horrified that they're still smoking, and they have this thing that tells them what the effect of it is on themselves, and their commitment and persistence to just do that to themselves is quite remarkable. It's kind of bizarrely religious, and I don't know, it's just like such a weird commitment, isn't it? I think I haven't seen them on the floor. Maybe I just don't. I've always hated smoking, so I've always like a blank. I don't see it. I just try not to experience it. So yeah.
Yeah, I like looking a lot, and I like. It's one thing I really missed when I was at home, kind of for weeks on end, just sort of the texture of things. And
there's another question that maybe connects to this from Lucy, which is around how do you organise and catalogue, or do you organise and catalogue, might be another question, your found objects, and how do you use out make meaning and making without being bogged down by them? Or, you know, do you hoard things, or are they very specific, the kind of things that you would collect anyway?
What was the thing about meaning and making and not being?
So, how do you organise and catalogue your found objects? And Lucy's saying she gathers and collects lots of things she finds on the street, like bits of concrete and other urban detritus. But how do you tease out meaning and making without being bogged down by the objects themselves, or by the quantity of objects? I think she's saying that she hoards a lot of things and struggles to materialise something. But like, do you do that? Do you get rid of things? Do you keep them? Do you?
It's a really good question, because I'm trying to have a studio clear out at the moment, and I've thrown away a lot, but there has to be a bit more. And yeah, I'm not as brutal as some artist friends that I've got about that. And I think that probably that's different ways of working. I don't think I really do have a way of categorising them. It's a bit of a chaos. Yeah.
Cool. Good.
Yeah.
But it was nice to sort of bring some things together for this.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks like it all makes sense and slots together, even though obviously it doesn't look like it was intended to, but somehow it just does.
That's the screen.
Maybe that's the catalogue. Maybe the cataloguing isn't like direct. It's kind of across time and.
Yeah, and I suppose ultimately they're catalogued in work.
Yeah.
So there's a really big, and again, thinking about what the studio is and what things are here, and why this is a special place or an important place. Why do I need this place? When I could work, there were so many things I found I could do at home, So I kept thinking, so expensive having a studio. I have to travel there every day and back. Do I really need it? And it's something about things being kind of in flux here. But I agree that can be overwhelming as well. But the works themselves are very, they're not here, thank goodness. They're kind of somewhere else. And they're probably where it gets catalogued or kind of organised.
There's two other very interesting questions here that are a bit more partly practical and partly philosophical in quite a nice poetic way. The first one is about your thoughts on the relationship of the fact that the work is so sensory, you know, and you're holding the materials and talking about touching but it's about you're thinking about the interaction of human bodies with your artworks, because in a lot of the photographs it's described as having a no touching vibe.
Yeah.
So how do you sort of balance those two impulses?
I think it does help to have photographs of artworks with people in them, and that rarely happens. I have made some works recently, so the work that I made for Turf Projects, again, the birthing pool last summer, you could get into it. It wasn't an installation, it's a sculpture, but you can get into it. This you can get into.
Yes, Susanna, who's asked the question, she went to that show and got in the birthing pool. So yeah, that work felt quite different from other sculptures, but I still like this sort of discipline of, maybe this links to the last question, kind of pulling things together in this very sort of formal way, that's sort of super sensory and really heightened, and you can't touch it and you know that you can't. But then, yeah, I'm making this big outdoor work for high desert test sites that you can get into. So increasingly I'm kind of able to have, and I'm thinking more about the other thing that I was able to do during the time that I was at home in the lockdown, was work on some proposals for public artworks, one of which is happening.
Oh, wow.
Any details at all, because they're going to be announced in the next couple of months, but it's my first public artwork.
Brilliant.
And it's in the UK, and it will be finished in May. Can't tell you anymore. But I think I was able to concentrate on that, and then another proposal that I'll know about in September, more because I was at home and I wasn't distracted by all of this stuff. But yeah, I've been thinking about the difference between what it is to show something for a month or 3 months in a gallery, and then what it is something to put something somewhere where people will walk by it every day, whether they like it or not. You know, it's a different responsibility. Yeah, and in those circumstances, it can be touched. As we now know, it can also be kind of pulled down and destroyed.
Yeah.
So yeah. I'm sorry, I think that wasn't really an answer.
There's one last question, which is a factory performs two major functions: the economic one of producing goods and the social one of creating and distributing human satisfaction. I quite like that phrase. Do you think your work could function as a tendril between these 2 points? Good question, Mark.
Yeah. I don't know about factories making satisfaction. That's amazing.
First, they're satisfying demand.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I'd have to think about that, but it's a great question.
Yeah, might be able to use that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like
there's a lot of anxiety in my work as well. I think there's a lot of pleasure, but there's also a lot of, there's its opposite as well.
Yeah, I think I can see that even with you, with the material that you're sitting in and holding, it's like a de-stressing process of the material, but it also looks like, something that's a leftover, an in-between, a kind of, it's like the side effect of other things that people make that could probably, end up in the sea and harm people, harm animals, harm ecosystems. it all looks like the work feels like it has that tension, I think, inbuilt into it.
This is wheelie bins, so it's melted down green wheelie bins. They get melted down and then they get turned into more wheelie bins, and this is them in their in-between melted down state. So this was wheelie bins and was about to be turned into more wheelie bins for some of it came here.
Yeah, they never imagined it would be a birthing pool.
No. It has a really great gravity, this material.
Yeah.
That's why it's relaxing, I think, to sit in it. It has a sort of slows you down. And I think it's really interesting at this moment to be thinking about being becalmed or beached. And I didn't want this conversation to be one of those in the studio conversations that's about continuous production or art production still happening despite the lockdown or despite COVID-19. I didn't want to contribute to that. I wanted this to be something else, and I like the idea of these materials sort of melting into a pool and being becalmed.
Great. Well, thank you for that. That's going to stay with us all for quite a while, I think. Yeah.
Thanks to everyone for coming.
Thanks very much, Alice. And thanks everyone for coming along. That was amazing. I think we could just stay there. We need to set this up.
Yeah.
We need to set this room up somewhere. Have we got? I'm trying to think. Have we got another one lined up at the moment? I can't remember.
I don't know if we've got. I think we've got some thoughts, but no dates.
Yeah, we haven't set a date, so I can't tell you when our next studio visit is. But we're planning to do an next studio visit with Harron Morrison, which because we're working with Harron for an exhibition next year. So we'll let you know. We'll send the information out. Thanks everybody, and keep safe and keep calm in your birthing pool environments, and we'll see you soon.